Let's get the overview of Spark Read APIs to read files of different formats. Spark has a bunch of APIs to read data from files of different formats. All APIs are exposed under spark.read. We have text to read single column data from text files as well as reading each of the whole text file as one record. We have CSV to read text files with delimiters. Default is comma, but we can use other delimiters as well. We have JSON to read data from JSON files, ORC to read data from ORC files, Parquet to read data from Parquet files. In most of the cases, we use either ORC or Parquet, but when we get the data from the sources, we typically get in text file format with the delimiters, and hence we use CSV to actually read those kind of files into Spark. We use a data structure called as a data frame in Spark to read the data from files into data frames. These are the APIs which can be leveraged. We can also read data from other file formats by plugging in and by using spark.read.format. We can also pass options based on the file formats. The options will change depending upon the file format we are trying to process, but typically we have infer schema to infer the data types of the columns based on the data. If the files are of type text, we have header to use header to get the column names. And then we can also specify schema explicitly using schema. Infer schema and schema are applicable for almost all the APIs that are available out there, whereas header is typically used for CSV, where there is a header which will actually give us the column names. We use the combination of header and infer schema to get column names and the data types inferred based on the data. We can get the help on Spark APIs like spark.read.csv using help function like this. Let's read delimited data from text files. For that, first we have to launch the Spark session object. This is how you should be able to take care. Quite often you might run into this issue if you are using our environment. We have multiple kernels. If the kernel chosen is not correct, you will run into this issue. Here, if you are trying to practice Spark, make sure you choose the kernel as PySpark2. Once the kernel is changed to PySpark2, you should be able to run this piece of code which will create Spark session object by name Spark for you. Once it is created, then you can actually go to the subsequent cells and run remaining code snippets. However, we have to wait until the star is changed to some number here. Now the Spark session object is created. You can validate by saying Spark before invoking any API. You can see that the Spark session object is created successfully. It is of type Spark session. Now, this is how you should be able to read the CSV file. But before getting in there, let's understand more about the spark.read. If you say spark.read, it will actually give the type of this attribute under Spark session object. It is of type data frame reader. So Spark object have an attribute called as read, which is of type data frame reader. This attribute actually exposes all the APIs relevant to reading the files from the source and create a data frame out of it. Now, if I say spark.read and hit tab, it should list all the APIs that are available. You can see you have JSON, ORC, Parquet, CSV, and also text. Also, it has something called as table. You will understand the relevance of it at a later point in time. Also, JDBC, so on and so forth. To read delimited files, we can use CSV. If you want to get the help on this, if you are using Jupyter-based environments, you can use question mark at the end, and you should be able to get the help. Now you can see the help on this function. You have to pass path as first argument, and then there are a bunch of keyword arguments. The important keyword arguments are nothing but schema, sep to provide the non-default separator other than comma, header to infer column names from the first line if the first line contains the column names, infer schema to infer the data types of the data based upon the data in the file, so and so forth. There are a few other keyword arguments which you can explore and start using it as per your requirements. You can see the details about the arguments here. When it comes to path, either you can pass one file as a string or a folder as a string, or you can even pass list of strings which contain the paths for multiple files. This is how you should be able to get the help. If you are not using Jupyter-based environment, to get the help, instead of using spark.read.csv question mark like this, you can actually say help. Then you can pass spark.read.csv to it, and you should be able to get the help on the function. Now let's go through this code snippet. It is supposed to read the files in this location in CSV format. To make sure that we are using appropriate APIs, we need to make a habit of reviewing the location and then take it further. Let me copy this and let me open using terminal, and then let me say hdfs dfs-cat and paste this path. It is a folder. That's why if I say hdfs dfs-cat public retail db orders and then more to just preview first few lines, it might fail because it's a folder, it's not a file. To confirm, you can also run hdfs dfs-ls and then say public retail db orders. You should be able to see the files in this folder. We have only one file, which is nothing but part-5 Now, to understand the characteristics of this file or the data in this file, we should be able to use cat command with more on this file name. So let me copy this file name and then say hdfs dfs-cat, paste this file name here and then say pipe more and hit enter. It will give us the characteristics of this data. There is no header in this file and hence we should not be using header equal to true. If you say header equal to true, it will treat the first line to be the header. Either it will be ignored or the data in this row will be considered as column names. In this case, as we are specifying schema explicitly like this, it will ignore the first line. So depending upon how you have built the overall function CSV, it will actually behave as per your requirement. So as I say, header equal to true and schema is explicitly passed like this, which will actually provide column names as well as data types for our data. The first line will be completely ignored and the output data frame will only contain one record less than what we have as part of our data. That being said, for now we will just run this and we will preview the output and we will not see the first line from this file. So let me come out of this here and then let me run this. You should be able to see the details. In this case, I am not using sep because the default delimiter is anyway comma. If the delimiter is something other than comma, you have to use the keyword argument called as sep and you have to pass the delimiter. Now you see the first line is missing because we have said header equal to true. If I remove this, the default is header equal to none and it will not treat the first line as header. It will treat the first line as data itself. Now it should work without any issue. You can see the first line as well here. So this is how you should be able to use CSV to read the data from file into data frame. Show is actually taking care of presenting the data for you for the preview. Now we can also read JSON data from text files. We can infer schema from the data as each JSON object contains both column name and value. With respect to CSV, we don't have the column names associated with the data. That's why we have to explicitly specify schema either using header or schema directly like this. Whereas with respect to JSON, each and every record will be like this. You will have the column name and the corresponding value to that column. So in this case, as we have 4 columns, these are the names for the 4 columns and these are the corresponding values for those 4 columns. Now you can directly use spark.read.json and pass the JSON file or folder which contain JSON files like this, and it will automatically take care of creating the data frame for you. It will infer the schema for you. Now let's go to the details about this location. Let me copy this location and then run hdfs dfs-ls, paste it. You can see the JSON file. You can also say hdfs dfs cat, then more and hit enter. You can see the data here. Each line contain the column names as well as the corresponding data, and hence we should be able to infer the schema using this data. Before running this, let's get the help on spark.read.json and review what are different options we have to actually create the data frame and control the behavior while creating it. For that, if you are using Jupyter based environment, you can say spark.read.json ? Like this. You can see the arguments here. We have path, we have schema. Even though we can infer the schema from JSON, sometimes that infer schema can be expensive and we might want to explicitly specify the schema. If you want to explicitly specify the schema, we can say schema equal to, and we should be able to pass the schema similar to what we have seen here earlier with the CSV. However, as we are dealing with a small dataset, we are letting the API to infer the schema, and hence it is inferring the schema for us. There are a few other arguments which you can go through depending upon your requirements, and you can start using those. Now, as we have gone through the details related to spark.read.json, we should be able to use this piece of code to read the data from JSON file into a data frame. To preview the data, we can use show like this. Now you should be able to see the details here. Data might not be in the same manner as we have seen in the file. Because we are using JSON, the columns are sorted based on the alphabetical order. You can see order customer ID came first, then date, then ID, then status, and you can see the output here. The data structure might not be the same as we have seen in the file as part of the output. Just keep these things in mind. When it comes to the APIs, each API might behave a bit differently. You cannot just compare directly and assume that they both will give you the output in same or similar manner. That being said, this is a quick overview about Spark Read APIs. Depending upon the file format, you have to use the appropriate API, and you should be able to read the data from the file into the data frame, and we need to understand how to process the data once the data frame is created. In this case, we are just using show to preview the data. There are a bunch of other APIs which we can leverage to process the data. We'll get into those details as part of the subsequent topics in this section and also topics in subsequent sections.